higher seed lost their match.
So maybe there's something to be said about being on the draw.
Yeah,
is what you're telling me.
an extra card, you know? It means a lot sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think we didn't get too many aggro decks in the top 8, and that might, that probably minimizes the importance of play versus draw.
Yeah, I agree completely. And here we see David pulling up his 7. Not a snap keep, gonna ponder it over a little. I think that what's gonna be really interesting about this matchup is once we get post board, how David's going to sculpt his deck, if he takes out the smaller creatures, or whether he goes more of a tempo plan. Uses Lifebane Zombie is like a card that you can use whether you're beating down or trying to 2-for-1 and 1-for-1 them. So it'll be interesting to see how he builds his deck.
And we are underway. David Doberne leads out on the play. He plays Godless Shrine untapped into Soldier of the Pantheon, so gets the 1-drop in his deck out, but it's matched on 1-drops by Bryan Eleyet with Elvish Mystic.
Yeah, the mana acceleration from the Green-Red Devotion deck, absolutely crucial. Get to that critical mass where you can just explode onto the board. Elvish Mystic, the ideal turn 1 here for Bryan.
All right, so despite having the more powerful 1-drop, David, he needs to probably stay at pace here. He's going to swing in for 2, bringing both players to 18. And looking over his hand, he has a fair number of options. It looks like he has a Thoughtseize in hand. He also is going to build up to a possible Desecration Demon here. Yeah,
the big topper is definitely going to be a major player in this game, but the 1-2 punch I was just talking about, the Precinct Captain following up the Soldier, if you're going to draw your small, cheap creatures, you need to do it early.
Absolutely. So now 4 power on the board for Doberne. Bryan's going to force Bryan to come up with a response. He is still on all green mana right now. It looks like he does have Stomping Ground, so the question is whether or not he wants to shock for it.
Right. Looks like he does.
All right, so Bryan will go to 16, and this will give him a play of Burning Tree Emissary into Sylvan Caryatid.
All right. David Doberne sure to get his Soldier of Pantheon trigger, get that life back.
Yeah, now one thing I really liked about the fast start from Doberne's deck, we said it wasn't very powerful in this matchup, was if you look at Bryan's hand, he did have the potential to make the turn 2 Domri Rod, which is probably one of the most scary starts of his deck. But thanks to Doberne's fast start, he wasn't able to make that play.
Under too much pressure to expose the Planeswalker, behind on board, and now it gets Thoughtseized.
Yeah, so
how convenient.
2 lands, the Domri Rod, and Scavenging Ooze will remain in Bryan's hand. Still a pretty good hand. I'm not positive how important Scavenging Ooze is in this matchup.
Yeah, I would imagine not too great, but especially at this stage, you draw it later, it can get pretty huge, but not exactly your ideal, say, turn 3 play.
Yeah, so another land for Doberne, and just to pass back, he's content to let mana bases develop, and it looks like that's what's going to happen here. Bryan places Temple of Abandon, scries to the top.
Looking for a Haymaker. He's got plenty of mana, he's got all his accelerants, he's got a good devotion count. Now he just needs some big stuff.
Yeah, so he's going to go ahead and empty out the spells in his hand. He's going to cast Elvish Mystic. He just drew a second Elvish Mystic. He follows it up with Scavenging Ooze and passes back to Doberne, who wastes no time in playing the 4th land and shuffling Desecration Demon to the front of his hand.
Yep, the demon is a huge board presence, very fast clock, and goes into the Abyss mode quite quickly.
Yeah, so Desecration Demon is really one of those cards that has found its place in the metagame thanks to, well, it seems like thanks to green decks.
Yes, I would agree with that. And here we see a Garruk scried to the top.
Garruk Primal Hunter, is it 1, 2, 3? Only drawing 4 cards.
How unlucky.
There's Burning Tree Emissary, Sylvan Caryatid, Arbor Colossus, and Scavenging Ooze. Arbor Colossus is almost a tailor-made answer to Desecration Demon.
Yeah, we saw that at the Pro Tour happen time and time again. The absolutely perfectly matched up card for the Desecration Demon.
Yeah, and Garruk is huge here. It drew 4. It'll threaten to draw more cards. And here, I almost want to say is where we see one of the weaknesses of Desecration Demon.
Yeah, when you're behind, it does not impact too much.
Yeah, you would say a 6/6 flyer would be great against this Planeswalker, but there's pretty much no chance that this demon's ever going to get to attack.
Yep, he's on the leash. He's in the cage. And it's pretty easy to outrun a, 1 creature a turn to sacrifice when you have Garrick plussing every turn.
Yeah. So we see there the sacrifice of Burning Tree Emissary. Well, thanks to Precinct Captain and Soldier of the Pantheon, the Emissary wasn't really doing too much work here, so it's sacrificed to tap the demon, but David does have the comeback in Hero's Downfall.
He absolutely clutched there. He needed an answer to that Garrick. You know, Garrick sticks around too long, you're just going to be buried.
Yeah. So in our other match in the control mirror, we have a quick game one. Thanks to a couple of missed land drops, Jesse Hansen was able to take game one over Nick Jones. Remember, the winner of that will be moving to the finals to play the winner of this match.
Can't miss land drops in the control mirror. That is certainly one way to lose the control mirror.
And Bryan Eleyet, if you just caught there on his turn, drew a replacement Garrick immediately.
How convenient.
Yeah, it looks like he's going to play the Burning Tree Emissary into the replacement Garrick.
All right. This is one of the things that this deck does so well. It has so many must-answer threats, it really taxes the removal of the opposing deck. Unless you have, you know, a Sphinx's Revelation to really keep up. If you're just trying to keep pace with your draw step, it's really hard to do. The threat density is pretty high for, you know, a traditional ramp deck, and a lot of the threats are either multiple threats or resilient threats or both, as is the case with Garrick.
Yeah, especially with, I mean, you talk about cards that create multiple threats. I mean, Garrick is the best example of that. That card, it creates so much card advantage when it's unanswered.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very hard to outrun naturally.
We saw the first one drew 4. We're going to see what the second one draws here. Just a quick update on life totals. We do have Doberne at 16, Bryan at 17. There's been some life total changes thanks to Soldier of the Pantheon. And 1, 2, 3.
Wow.
And it's going to be another draw 3 here off this Garrick.
Is that an Arbor Colossus, a Scavenging Ooze, and some hungry dude?
And the World Eater himself of Pelucranos. That'll be the second Arbor Colossus and second Scavenging Ooze that Bryan has in his hand now. Thanks to the Garrick he played last turn, he's now drawn 7 cards off these 2 Garricks and has a full grip at this late point in the game.
Who needs Sphinx's Revelation when you got, you know, awesome planeswalkers like Garrick?
I mean, Garrick, in many ways, draws more cards than Sphinx's Revelation.
It is true. It is true. And just sticks around, you know? If you don't have the Hero's Downfall as David Doberne, then you are in quite a world of hurt.
Yeah, so Garrick's one of these cards that's very nice in the fact that he combos with himself. We've seen his +1 ability be used twice, which is reveals the top 5 cards and grabs all creatures. At one point, you know, if Bryan starts to get too many creatures in his hand, Garrick helps out there too. He can put one of the creatures for free on the battlefield, giving Bryan the chance to make plays like place Arbor Colossus in play and immediately monstrous it.
That is quite a powerful sequence. Take out that demon for good, you get a 9/9, and you know, it only costs you half the mana.
Right. Now you do have to be careful with the monstrous cards, is that all those monstrosity effects trigger on when it becomes monstrous, so a removal spell is very strong against them.
Yes, it will stop the trigger from the monstrosity ability.
All right, and Bryan's going to take the safe plan of more cards. So we see Pelucranos, and it might just be a draw 1 this time. Draw 2, it gets a Caryatid as well.
Why not? I like the scry first, make sure that Garrick hits, and then go deep.
Yeah, I mean the card, if Bryan could pick any card, he would wish that Garrick could draw that Nykthos, which he put up to the bottom. He would actually be able to play his whole hand. As it is, he'll have to settle for just playing 2 to 3 creatures every turn.
Oh darn.
Yeah.
That's all?
That is all. He's going to start with Sylvan Caryatid. Followed up, he has 5 more mana. It looks like it's going to be another Sylvan Caryatid. We may see another Scavenging Ooze.
Well, we know that there's no sweeper in David's deck. There's no Damnation or, you know, Mutilate type card. So Bryan is free to deploy all of his threats and just overwhelm him.
Yeah, one of the interesting things right now about Standard is that there's no mono black sweeper, and I don't believe there's a mono white sweeper. If you want a sweeper effect, you have to go to gold cards.
Yeah, Merciless Eviction or
yeah, you can go to black
Supreme
white for
Verdict.
that. Right.
Yeah. That does not happen too often.
Desecration Demon gonna get tapped once again here. This time off an Elvish Mystic, and a second Desecration Demon will be in play.
Even 2 demons is pretty easy to outrun when you got Garrick.
Yeah, there's so much card advantage right now from Eleyet. remember that. I wonder if we'll see that Arbor Colossus play now.
Yeah, now that David Doberne is tapped out, I would not be surprised at all to see -3 and right on
Here
cue.
we have it. -3 will place Arbor Colossus into play, and while Doberne's tapped out, he's going to go ahead and monstrous it, and that is enough for Doberne. Doesn't need to see more. He's going to go ahead and concede
No,
to
monstrosity
that
just
play.
kills your flyer, not all your lands. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Oh, he's scooping. Okay.
Yeah, I think any game where opponent gets off 4 Garrick activations.
Yeah,
They
you're just
use-
looking for an excuse to pick up your cards.
Yeah, it's very hard to beat the 4th Garrick activation. All right.
So now we go to the sideboard, which is where things get a little interesting. David Doberne can actually do quite a bit. We're actually going to throw it to the booth, I
Yeah,
think, for
we'll
a
bring
second.
back into the booth for a second. So, for those of you thank you for joining us early in the morning. I'm Matthias Hunt, joined by AJ Soccer. We are currently in the middle of our top 4 match between David Doberne and Bryan Eleyet, but right now is when we do trivia. So, the rules. How does your...
Okay, you have to be following, and you have SCG Live, and you have to use the hashtag SCG Premium, which you can see on the bottom here. We're going to ask you a question. Tweet it there, and you are entered in a raffle of sorts. You know, accuracy, not speed. And if you get it right, then you can win 6. We're doing 6?
We're doing 6 for the top
Oh, that's
4.
so
Yep,
generous
6.
of you. Okay, we're going to do 6 months of premium for the winner of that. So, nice.
All right, so this one is, we have a history question here. We actually talked about it earlier in our broadcast today, but you can also figure it out. If you look at our deck database, you can find this out. So currently we're watching Bryan Eleyet and David Doberne, and we're wondering, they are playing currently in a rematch of the finals of what recent Magic event? So this Doberne versus Eleyet matchup. And that event should be in our deck database, so if you just are joining us, you can find it there. Last time in the rematch, Eleyet was the victorious.
Yep.
Looks like he may be getting it again.
Yep, took down the trophy there and is up a game here.
Yeah. We also have it in our coverage archive, so there are places. Remember, you have to
There
tweet
are
that
places.
answer to find it. You have to tweet the answer with SCG hashtag SCG Premium to be eligible to win.
Yes.
All right. So you're saying talking about sideboards though.
Yes. I think the David Doberne's sideboarding plan here is so awesome because there are just so many different paths he can take. When he's on the play, right, he can have all these cheap drops and actually try and curve out, play like a soldier into precinct captain into the Lifebane zombie and beat down that way. Or he can assume the control role, board out those smaller creatures, and just go straight up all removal and try and run Bryan Eleyet out of threats.
Right. I mean, with a mid-range deck like Doberne's, the mid-range decks really benefit from sideboarding. This doesn't seem like it'd be any exception.
Right.
Banisher Priest also seems pretty strong here, as there's not much removal in Eleyet's deck.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that that's the type of card that can really play both sides. It's a board presence and a removal spell. So I think that we're going to see a more controlling stance from David, if I had to guess. But I do like the fact that he has other options available to him.
One thing I like about his sideboard is that he has an extra Elspeth Sun's Champion in it. That is one of the most potent threats against a green-red deck right now.
Yes.
They do not have any actual removal for the card.
Yeah, make a bunch of chump blockers for those giant creatures and also blow up all those giant creatures.
So on the green-red side, there's not too much that Bryan has in the board for this matchup. A lot of his cards are really tailor-made threats. You see things like Mistcutter Hydra and Burning Earth for control decks, and Eleyet's Disciple for red decks. He plays the 4th Domery Rod in the sideboard. Because this is a removal-heavy deck, we might see the 4th Domery Rod get played.
Yeah, I would imagine that comes in. I would not be surprised to see Chandra come in either.
Yeah, that gives him more reach. Chandra actually has things she can kill in this matchup. She can take out Soldier of the Pantheon.
Or Lifebane Zombie from the board. So I think that is certainly going to come in. Just another resilient threat. Really got to tax those heroes' downfalls.
Yeah, one card you might be wondering about in his board is, which we haven't mentioned, is Wasteland Viper. So Wasteland Viper is this 1/2 Death Touch Blood Rush card from Gatecrash. You might say, why would a deck want to be playing a 1/2 Death Touch? It actually is a combo in the green mirrors with Pelucranos World Eater. You attack with him, you Blood Rush the Wasteland Viper onto Pelucranos, and then you have him fight your opponent's entire board for 1 damage each, and you sweep your opponent's board. That's the tech behind that card. Probably not something he'll be using in this matchup, but still one of the more interesting innovations from the Pro Tour decks.
That is a really cool little interaction.
Sounds like that's the first time you've heard that one?
Yeah, I just figured it was a blocker for red or what have you.
Oh, no, it's way cooler than that.
That is awesome. I like that interaction.
So we will have David on the play. We saw him curve out with early creatures last game, and that worked. That really only served to get Bryan down to 14. So is that a game plan that he hangs on to here?
No, I would have to assume that David's going to have to assume the control role here. Just use his plethora of Doomblade variants and try and run Bryan out of threats. The big problem with that plan is the multiple threats, such as Garrick plussing and drawing more creatures, Domri Raid finding more creatures, not to mention that those don't get hit by Doomblade. That takes a hero's downfall.
Yeah, you were saying that the hero's downfalls are overloaded a little bit in the matchup.
I would say so. I think that the Planeswalkers are really resilient threats and sources of card advantage for Bryan Eleyet, and David Doberne doesn't have a way to keep up with that card advantage. 3 Read the Bones is not exactly enough to outrun a Garrick. So the Planeswalkers are going to have to die, and they're going to have to die quickly, with only 4 heroes downfalls that also are going to be taxed by giant creatures. It's hard to hold a hero's downfall for a Planeswalker when you're facing down, a 5/5. So it is certainly possible that the hero's downfall count is going to be one of the important little sub games going on in this game too.
Yeah, so when you're a control deck and the threat deck has better card advantage than you, your game plan seems like it has to change. You have to also become a threat deck.
Yeah, you have to be able to kill the opponent. You have to be able to turn the corner in a meaningful way. And he's hoping that, Desecration Demon and Obsidian Ghost Council can do exactly that.
And we'll see if they can. Both players trade tap lands to start the game. Bryan's lets him scry one, which he scries to the bottom. No play on turn 2 from Doberne. So the first play will likely be coming from the green-red side of the board, and it will be Burning Tree Emissary into Sylvan Caryatid.
A sizable board presence already on turn 2. Doomblade the 2/2. So this indicates to me that David Doberne's draw is very slow. He's probably going to have to,
Yeah, that's a pretty aggressive Doomblade here.
That is a very indicative Doomblade of the fact that his draw is going to be... He's not assuming the control role.
Yeah, now a pretty big opening for him here. Bryan Eleyet on turn 3 missed his land, didn't make any plays past the turn, and that allowed Doberne to stick a turn 4 Desecration Demon onto a near empty board.
Yep, and that is the plan that David had in mind. This is him taking initiative, seizing initiative in this game.
Remember, there are a few ways that Bryan can answer the Desecration Demon. He does have Arbor Colossus, and he does have it in his hand. Okay. But thanks to the amount of spot removal in Doberne's deck, that is a iffy plan at best, as we see him draw another Doomblade.
Yeah, deck full of Doomblades, green creatures as a game plan. And there we see a hero's downfall on the Pelucranos, and Desecration Demon does get in for 6.
Yeah, Doberne's going to waste no time in taking care of that Pelucranos. He doesn't want Eleyet to untap at all with a chance to pay the monstrosity cost on it.
Right. Soldier of Pantheon still in the deck and looking a little meek.
Well, there's this tree in the way right now.
Yeah. But if that tree were ever to be sacrificed at the altar of the Desecration Demon the soldier is turned on, just any amount of board presence is going to have some sort of value for David here. And
as it is right now, Bryan may have to use the Caryatid to cast some spells. Remember, 1 hit from the Soldier of the Pantheon actually takes a turn off Bryan's clock because the Desecration Demon hits in increments of 6.
That is absolutely correct. And we see a Pelucranos and a missed land drop from Bryan.
Yeah, and another Doomblade drawn from Doberne. So now his hand has... He Doomblades the Pelucranos, swings 8, gets that extra turn, and his hand still has another Doomblade and another Hero's Downfall in it.
Well, this was his game plan from turn 2 when he Doombladed a 2/2. Just run him out with Desecration Demon.
You often use the Turbine of Skyrim creatures that are just large creatures without value effects, as you say, oh, well, it's a good creature, but it dies to Doomblade. I think David Doberne is taking that point to the extreme in this game.
He is proving that does hold true.
Everything dies to Doom-related. It looks like he might cast 5 of them this game.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that is certainly one way to carry with your Desecration Demon is kill all their creatures so they can't sacrifice any to slow your demon down. So now Bryan Eleyet's at a bit of a crossroads here, still choked on mana, so not able to do 2 things in a turn.
Yeah, one thing I like here is he makes Xenagos the Reveler, and that usually is a card that's really strong at holding off a Desecration Demon. So that Soldier of the Pantheon that we thought was really weak here is actually becoming very strong because it has protection from these 2/2 Satyr tokens.
Ooh.
It allows Doberne to chip away at that Xenagos and hopefully force through the last attack of his Desecration Demon.
Yep, so he does indeed play that, and...
Gonna Doomblade the Satyr token.
Alright.
And that will mean that Eleyet will have to sacrifice the Caryatid to tap the Desecration Demon.
And the Soldier gets in, and Bryan's mana screw is compounded by the fact that he's losing a mana creature here. So David really...
We'll see whether Soldier goes at Eleyet or at the Xenagos. It's going to go at Bryan Eleyet, putting him to 4. Hero's Downfall takes care of the Xenagos.
Sure! More removal!
More removals. That is the 5th. That is the 5th pinpoint removal spell. You see,
Look at that graveyard.
3 Doomblades and 2 Heroes Downfall. Good enough to send this to a game 3.
Yep, that is one way to play Magic, you know? Desecration Demon is a very sizable threat when you are ahead on a, barren board.
Right, so his game plan there, play 1 really big threat and a lot of kill spells, worked perfectly.
Yep, and that is a big part of the design of this deck.
Yes, so one of the weaknesses of the Green Red Devotion deck, I think, is that when all your cards are being killed as they're played, Bryan was only ever able to play 1 spell per turn, and each of his spells costs more than the removal that Doberne was using to kill them. So as a result, he was never able to establish a board presence there.
Yeah,
and that was really important.
He was, behind on mana usage and tempo on every one of those exchanges, and it really adds up, especially when you're facing down a 6/6 flyer.
All right, so the players move back to their sideboards here. We might see a little bit of re-sideboarding.
We did see Soldier of the Pantheon still in David Doberne's deck, so he does still think that that's a useful card, and it does have its applications. Protection from Burning Tree Emissary and Satyr tokens.
Yeah, it may be that he only has limited options. When you think about the cards he wants to board, he could plausibly board in, the Banisher Priest, the Lifebane Zombies, the Devour Flesh, and the Elspeth are probably the only reasonable cards to board in. It might be that when you go down the list of things he wants to board out, Precinct Captain probably takes precedence there.
Yep.
You might not even want Read the Bones in the matchup. It's possible that that's just some number of Soldier of the Pantheons just have to stay in.
Yeah, that is definitely possible. It's certainly a better choice than the Precinct Captain. I would agree with that. So Bryan Eleyet, what does he have to do?
Well, I mean, not stumble on mana is one thing. Obviously, he doesn't have too much control over that. That last game, we actually saw a pretty good start by Eleyet. He was able to have a mana accelerant and play a large creature every turn. It was not enough there, unfortunately, but I think that's the game plan he wants to be on. If he can resolve cards like Domri Rod, those cards matter, but they only matter so much. Domri draws some extra cards, but it wasn't really it wasn't running out of cards that was the problem that last game.
Yeah, he died with 5 or 6 cards in hand.
Right, I think he wants to continue, if he could have an ideal hand, he wants to get a lot of mana. So actually a card like Xenagos will really help with that, thanks to his mana ability.
Yep, I would agree with that. I think the acceleration cards are really important. Bryan needs to get on board, and he needs to get on board quickly. The tempo advantage of a 2 or 3 mana removal spell killing your 4 or 5 mana creature is mitigated a bit if you're playing those creatures off of accelerants, because they're coming out, a turn or 2 earlier. And I think that that's the way that Bryan can sort of equalize that tempo advantage, and then it's just a matter of riding his Planeswalkers to a card advantage victory over the 1-for-1 deck of David Doberne.
I think what he can hope to do is if he can stick one of his, because he's on the play, he can get threats down early enough to put a lot of pressure on Doberne. If he can keep the pressure high, then Doberne won't have a window to cast something like Desecration Demon.
Yes, exactly. Keep him on the back foot, and that is exactly what he's going to try and do, especially from the play. So shuffling up here, I think this is probably one of the matchups where being on the play matters the most.
Yeah, certainly in the top 8, it seemed like when David was on the play, well, he's been on the play both times, so Bryan was able to win one of them on the draw.
That's true.
It seems like it'll be a lot harder for him to establish his own board presence when he's on the draw.
Yeah, just for the fact that, David Doberne is trying to 1-for-1 you out. David doesn't mind being on the draw, but Bryan is trying to tempo David out, and when you're trying to do that, being on the play is super important because you want to get those threats in underneath the removal spells. Otherwise, you are at that huge tempo disadvantage, which we saw last game. So Bryan, considering his options, looking over his 7, can this win? Looks like one of those lands and spells hands that, it may not have the best plan in mind, but at least you're balanced.
We already talked yesterday about how some of these strategies, especially like Green-Red Devotion, have a really hard time mulliganing.
Yes.
Because they play a lot like a ramp deck. They need to have lands, ramp, and spells. Looks like we will see a 7-on-7 this time, both players keeping their 7-card hands. No turn 1 mana accelerant from Bryan. Plays Forest and passes.
Yeah, I'm glad that Bryan didn't have to mulligan, especially on the play. Against the 1-for-1 deck, being down 2 cards might have been too detrimental to come back from, but we do start on 7. Bryan with a Forest on turn 1. David Doberne going to lead with Thoughtseize.
Yeah, the worry about that Forest is that Bryan kept a hand without red sources. That's what Forest seems to suggest.
Yep.
And we will see it as Burning Tree Emissary, Domri Rod, Scavenging Ooze, Pelucranos, and another land in the Forest. It looks like Bryan was on 6 cards.
Looks
for
like
this.
he was. Well, even though he doesn't.
7. There we go. Cards hiding. Okay, I was like, I don't believe he mulliganed this game.
Yeah.
Just had the Forest stacked.
The Burning Tree Emissary acts as the red source for the Dahmer raid, so I think you have to take the Planeswalker here. You can Doomblade the rest of the cards that Bryan has. Dahmer raid's the real card advantage engine and the one that's the narrowest, or the hardest to hit.
Yeah, Thoughtseize is such a strong weapon against these decks. They really do, in a lot of ways, play like a ramp deck, and they just have a lot. Like, the way you beat the green-red deck is you 1-for-1 with other things, and Thoughtseize is a really efficient way to 1-for-1 with the deck.
Absolutely. It's like another Doomblade, but in exchange for the tempo advantage of them having to cast their card, you get the advantage of being able to preempt Planeswalkers before they get a little value.
Yep, and he's going to do just that as he takes the Domri Rod, leaving Bryan with Scavenging Ooze, Burning Tree Emissary, Pelucranos, and lands. Bryan does draw the red source in Temple of Abandon, and it's going to make both his 2-drops.
Yep, aggression. You got to get on board. Bryan Eleyet correctly identifies himself as the beatdown.
Yeah, we look at Doberne's hand. It has at least one Doomblade variant in it, and that it has a Hero's Downfall. I believe it has more. So the 1-for-1 removal once again showing itself in David's hand.
Yep, and Bryan not only getting on board, but doing so under the removal, and Burning Tree Emissary is like the perfect card for this type of draw, as you are creating multiple threats and really taxing David Doberne's removal.
So Bryan's last 2 draws have both been green-red temples. So, land's not an ideal draw here, but fortunately they do help him scry. He right now chose to keep his card on top, so he swings for 4 with his pair of 2/2s, passes the turn back.
Yeah, we talked last game about the tempo advantage of a 2 or 3 mana spell killing a 4 mana creature. Ooh, Lifebane Zombie. And Burning Tree Emissary is kind of the inverse of that. It's a free creature, so spending a 2 or 3 mana removal spell on a creature that was mana efficient like that is a pretty big tempo boost the other way.
It looks like the card he kept on top was Arbor Colossus, as that was Bryan's draw for the turn. Lifebane Zombie did take the Pelucranos out of his hand, and it'll do a great job as it can trade with either Scavenging Ooze or Burning Tree Emissary here. We see that David does have both the Hero's Downfall and an Obsidian Ghost Council in his hand. So
it's a pretty good hand.
The game seems to just be that for David right now to stay alive.
Yeah, I think that the thoughts he's taking out the Doberne raid was absolutely huge. It left Bryan fairly threat light. Even though he was able to get on board quickly, he kind of is petering out. His aggressive start didn't have much follow-up, at least not yet, and that's exactly what David Doberne wanted to happen.
Yeah, so Lifebane Zombie effectively keeps the Scavenging Ooze off the attack. Bryan only swings with Burning Tree Emissary as he doesn't want to make the Ooze trade. David does take it and goes to 12, but is able to respond now with large Haymakers of his own as he taps out for Desecration Demon.
Looks like another demon in hand in addition to the Obsidian and Hero's Downfall that you mentioned. So quite a stacked little hand for David, and Bryan Eleyet kind of under the gun here.
Yeah, the creatures are getting big quickly out of the black-white deck.
It's not often that you see black-white out-creaturing green-red, but
yeah,
6/6 for 4 is quite large.
Desecration Demon, that really has been his role recently. It's just more efficient. It's interesting, yeah, he's more efficient than most of the green threats. One threat that he doesn't tangle well with is Arbor Colossus. That's going to be Bryan's play for the turn. He's going to tap out for it. The question will be, does he get to untap and monster set to kill a demon?
It's unlikely.
Unlikely.
Unlikely, I would say. Trigger Desecration Demon. Bryan, would you like to sacrifice at the altar? I don't think that it's time yet.
Yeah, well, it might be. We might see Doberne attack with the Desecration Demon and offer a trade with Arbor Colossus because he could turn the demon into a removal spell that way.
Then play your second demon. I like that.
Right.
And then if the trade is denied, then you can still just use a removal spell.
We'll see here. Yeah, there's no lack of large creatures in David's hand, so he does have the luxury of being able to use one that way.
Yeah, turn one into a removal spell. I'm sure he would take that if he could. Looks like no, he is going to Doomblade it before blockers, not going to offer that up. And in for 6.
Doomblade is used. If that 5th land came into play, it was a Orzhov Guildgate, but Bryan is at 14.
Another land for Bryan, not exactly what he was looking for. And now he is really under the gun. The sequence of draws that needs to happen now probably involves a Garruk, I would say.
All right, yeah, he's just running out of cards. He needs to draw a lot more.
Yeah.
He's going to be able to get some damage in. He puts the Burning Tree Emissary in once again. It goes past the Lifebane Zombie to put Doberne down to 10. And the follow-up play will be a second Scavenging Ooze.
All right.
Now, with this, because he had a second Scavenging Ooze in hand, it's interesting that he did not swing the first Ooze into the Lifebane Zombie there.
That is a little interesting. It would make sense to keep it back had he not had the second Scavenging Ooze, but with that second Ooze, offering the trade makes the second Ooze quite large, although I suppose you don't want to invest so much into one creature that's very likely just going to be killed.
Yeah, so we see Doberne untapped here. He's facing down 3 creatures, so he needs to play a little carefully here.
Yeah. Yeah. Being ahead does not mean that you win. You still have to, tread carefully. And I think if that is indeed an Obsidian,
yeah,
that would be, yep.
And we do see Obsidian Ghost Council here. It's going to drain for 2. That evens the life up to 12-12. Now we'll see whether or not David hits with the Desecration Demon. That 2 life did just shave a turn off the clock.
Yep.
Now 2 hits in the demon is lethal. And Doberne is just going to pass, does not even blink out the Obsidian.
No attacks with the demon, no blinks with the Obsidian. Really taking a conservative, controlling route here. I have to think that this means that David feels he's very far ahead.
He just wants to make sure there's no way he can lose.
Yeah, does not want to die to something random, such as a Chandra taking out a blocker.
Yeah, so what you actually saw, what is interesting from Bryan there is that he did not use the Scavenging Ooze end step to eat the Arbor Colossus. It would have grown into a 3/3, which is not particularly relevant on this board.
Right. You might as well save it for so that you have more information and can pump the creature that matters, the ooze that matters.
Yeah, so Chandra's going to go ahead and take out the Lifebane zombie. Don't know if that opens the possibility for Bryan to attack here.
No,
Doesn't
but
look like it. But that's a start.
yeah, it is step one, certainly. And it's filling up the graveyard. Those oozes are gonna start growing as well.
Yeah, so Bryan has the decision of whether or not he wants to spread the counters between the oozes or put all the counters on one ooze here. What are your thoughts?
I think that you have plenty of mana. You can wait until the last possible moment to make this decision. If you want to use a mana, I think that if you want to pump an ooze this turn, you can put one counter on one, and then save the other one for.
Right, you know that's so by just you eating one of the creatures, that's not really making a decision yet.
Yeah, exactly. You're not committing to anything, but you're saving yourself a potential mana in case you need to play, another 5-drop.
All right, and Bryan enters tap mode here on the demon as he does sacrifice Burning Tree Emissary to tap the Desecration Demon. Obsidat is going to be able to swing here. That's a 5/5. Bryan does have the ability to kill it on a double block. That would be playing very much into the hands of a removal spell if he chooses to do it.
That is the classic Magic construct. The limited, since the beginning of Limited, the blowing out a double block with a removal spell has been a thing.
And this is actually an interesting attack here. It's a really conservative play by David in that this is going at the Chandra, not at Bryan right now.
Yep, this follows. This makes sense with his previous conservative play. He really does feel that he's extremely far ahead and wants to make sure that he doesn't die to something random and has plenty of time to deploy all of the extra cards that he has on Bryan.
Yeah, and speaking of those extra cards, he plays some of them. David plays a Soldier of the Pantheon, a second Desecration Demon, and then exiles the Obsidat for the turn.
Yep, this is quite a dominating board presence, and that is one use for the Soldier of Pantheon. Just another thing. 1-drops have this ability to let you do 2 things in a turn, cast 2 spells in a turn, which in the mid to late game can actually be really, really important, especially against aggressive strategies.
All right, so he does spread out the counters across the 2 oozes, giving himself a pair of 3/3s. But Bryan, on an empty hand, is playing off the top of his deck, trying to find a way to sneak across 11 more damage. And facing a large aerial attack from 2 demons.
I would have to assume that the sequence for Bryan is gotta start with a Garrick. I'm trying to think of other ways to get out from under this, but I think you're so far behind on cards, you need to find a way back up.
Well, the Garrick would only get 1 activation too, right? You'd almost certainly be taken out by David.
Yes, very likely.
And the draw for turn was Burning Tree Emissary, so just a 2/2.
A little underwhelming.
Yeah, I know Bryan here, you can see, trying to figure out a way to get past the demons. He could tap them with the Burning Tree. He has some options. He could tap them with the Burning Tree Emissary and swing Scavenging Oozes across. He could get actually a fair amount of damage across that way. But then I'll have to sacrifice away his Oozes to just not die the following turn.
Yeah, he's 1 short from gaining, or no, he's way less than that because Obsidat's going to come back and drain.
Exactly. So Doberne was back up to 11. Bryan back down to 12. So Doberne's actually up to 13. So thanks to that counter on the Desecration Demons, the 2 demons by themselves are lethal in the air.
Yep.
So at least 1 sacrifice is going to have to be made, and likely more.
Either at the altar of the demons or throwing under the Obsidat, or you're certainly under the abyss here.
Yeah, so right now the Burning Tree Emissary is sacrificed to the 7/7 demon. Doberne is seeing whether or not another sacrifice is going to be made. Right now the graveyards are filling up, so one of these Scavenging Oozes could become a 5/5 and actually trade with the Obsidat.
Yeah. Which is, you know, a slight advantage for Bryan that the Obsidian is now deterred from attacking.
Yeah, so Desecration Demon swings in, hits Bryan down to 6 life, and Obsidian decides whether it's going to stay or leave. Lifebane Zombie is cast, land is played, and Obsidian will leave now that Doberne has 2 blockers. He is setting up for a lethal swing next turn.
Yeah, it is. It would take an impressive sequence from Bryan off the top of his deck here to survive this next attack. Through an Intimidate creature, an Obsidian trigger, 2 giant flying demons, the Obsidian himself.
Yeah, so both the graveyards now are going to be emptied out of creatures as Bryan eats both of the remaining creatures with Scavenging Ooze. He spreads them across the 2 oozes to make them both 4/4s, moves them up to 8. We'll see what he can draw. His draw for the turn was Voyaging Satyr, and that's not going to be enough. So David Doberne, this time, gets to walk out the winner of the matchup as he defeats Bryan Eleyet 2-1.
Very interesting. I mean, you can equate that, you can simplify that down to Doomblades versus green creatures, but the matchup seems so much more dynamic because of the fact that the green-red deck actually has a greater source of card advantage than the control deck. That the control deck, which in this case is the black-white mid-range deck, actually does have to turn a corner and actually kill the opponent, and Desecration Demon does a very good job at exactly that.
Yeah, we've seen this black-white mid-range deck. So in the top 8, we saw David Doberne defeat a aggro deck in the form of Chad Taylor's Blue Devotion deck. We saw him defeat Bryan Elliot's mid-range deck in terms of the red-green Devotion deck.